June 26th, 1997. Late night. Outside Bordeaux Prison, Montreal. A corrections officer climbs into her minivan after a 10-hour shift. She turns the key, pulls out of the lot, and points herself toward home. Two motorcycles roll out of the darkness behind her. They close the gap fast, very fast. Then the shooting starts. Diane Levine never made it home that night. She was a widow, a mother of two daughters, a woman who spent over a decade working inside one of Quebec's most notorious prisons. She wasn't a criminal, she wasn't a rat, she wasn't collateral damage in some turf dispute. She was chosen because of the uniform she wore. That was enough. Montreal had never seen anything like it. A prison guard, hunted down and executed on a public highway. Not in a back alley, not behind closed doors. On the road home. In the world of the Hells Angels, the message wasn't the bullet. The message was the location. The man who pulled that trigger was Stéphane Gagné. He didn't kill out of rage. He didn't kill out of desperation. He killed because he wanted a patch. A full-color, diamond-shaped, stitched-on leather patch that said he was a Hells Angel. That was the price of admission into one of the most powerful criminal organizations on the planet. And Gagné was willing to pay it in blood. He was supposed to be loyal for life. Instead, he became the man who looked Maurice Mom Boucher dead in the eye from the witness stand, and buried him. This is the story of how the Hells Angels' most trusted killer became their most dangerous enemy. Before the war, before the murders, before any of it. There was Hochelaga-Maisonneuve. If you know Montreal, you know that name. A working-class pocket of the East End, built on factory floors and sweat. The kind of neighborhood where ambition either drives you out or drives you under. By the 1970s, the factories were shutting down one by one. Poverty moved in like a permanent tenant. And for kids growing up on those streets, the education system wasn't a school, it was the corner. Stéphane Gagné was born there on December 12th, 1969. From day one, the odds were stacked against him, but not in the way people usually mean. His uncle wasn't just a tough guy, he was a hitman. He ran work for the Dubois Brothers, a Montreal crime family so violent they made headlines through the 70s for murders, torture, and terror across the East End. In 1974, that uncle was killed. Gagné was 4 years old. Violence wasn't something distant in his family. It was the inheritance. His father was a professional wrestler. His mother stayed home with the kids. On paper, it could have gone differently. But Gagné struggled with learning disabilities and ADHD in a school system that didn't know what to do with kids like him. Other students bullied him. Teachers wrote him off. By age 13, he was done. He walked out of school and never looked back. The streets took him in and taught him everything the classroom refused to. He started dealing drugs, stealing cars, breaking into homes. He later admitted he was practically living in a fog, almost permanently high on hashish and PCP. By the time most kids were worrying about exams, Gagné already had a criminal record. But even among street dealers, he stood out, not for his ambition, for his brutality. That's where the nickname came from. Godass, old shoe in French. He earned it the hard way. When someone crossed him, when someone stole from him, when someone showed disrespect, Gagné didn't just fight back. He knocked them to the ground and kicked them in the head with worn-out shoes until the point was made permanently. He once savagely beat a woman working in one of his drug operations for stealing from him. When pressed about it later, he felt nothing. His exact words, "If you let that kind of thing go, everyone will steal from you." This is important to understand about Gagné before you hear the rest of his story. Violence wasn't a last resort for him. It wasn't even a tool, it was a language. The only one he trusted, the only one that earned him what he wanted most in that world: respect. By 24, he was running crack houses and heroin shooting galleries across Montreal, clearing $6,000 a week. He owned a house with his wife, Marie Claude. He collected government welfare while secretly banking $250,000 a year. And he named his son Harley David, after his motorcycle. Then Montreal caught fire. Between 1994 and 2002, the Quebec biker war consumed the city. Over 160 people were killed. Bombings, arson, targeted assassinations. drive-by shootings in neighborhoods where families lived. The Hells Angels wanted total control of Quebec's drug trade. The rock machine stood in the way, and the space between them was a war zone. Now, before you understand Gagné's role in all of this, you need to understand what the Hells Angels actually are, not the myth, the structure. The Hells Angels aren't just a motorcycle club. They're a hierarchy, a corporation with teeth. At the bottom, you have hang-arounds, guys who orbit the club, doing favors, proving their worth, waiting to be noticed. Above them are prospects, on probation, doing the dirty work, earning their way in. Then full patch members, the ones with the complete Hells Angels colors on their back. And above them, within certain powerful chapters, leadership positions that carry real authority in the criminal underworld. In Quebec, the most powerful chapter wasn't the regular clubs. It was the Nomads, a hand-picked elite chapter that operated above the rest, answerable only to themselves. And at the head of the Nomads sat Maurice "Mom" Boucher. If you've heard one name from the Quebec Biker War, it's his. In the underworld, people lowered their voices when they said it. Boucher didn't just want a share of the drug trade. He wanted a monopoly. He wanted all of it. Every gram of cocaine, every bag of heroin, every pill sold in the province running through his organization. And anyone who wasn't with him was a problem that needed solving. In July 1994, one of Boucher's lieutenants, Paul Fonfon Fontaine, walked into Gagné's operation and issued an ultimatum that wasn't really an ultimatum at all. Shut down your drug houses, they compete with ours. Work for us, or you're finished. That was the choice. Submit, join the other side, or die. Gagné's business partner, Tony Jalber, chose the rock machine. That decision would eventually get him killed. Gagné made a different calculation, a colder one. He reached out for a direct meeting with Boucher himself. They sat down on Sherbrooke Street in downtown Montreal. What followed wasn't a conversation. It was a performance in the secret language of Montreal's underworld. Gagné touched his nose. Cocaine. Then he touched Boucher's arm. Buy from you. Boucher pointed to Fontaine. The message was clear. You deal through him. You work under us. Years later, testifying in court, Gagné explained his thinking with brutal clarity. He said, "I'm not stupid. I knew the Angels would win the war. They're rich, better organized, and certainly more disciplined." He wasn't joining out of loyalty or belief or brotherhood. He was joining because he could see where the power was going. He was betting on the right horse before the race was over. The next step would require blood. It came faster than he expected. In the fall of 1994, Gagné was arrested selling cocaine to an undercover officer and sent to Bordeaux prison. Inside those walls, the biker war didn't pause. It simply moved indoors. In December of 1994, a rock machine member named Jean Ducaire cornered Gagné in the prison yard. He pulled out a photograph of Maurice Boucher and threw it on the ground at Gagné's feet. "Step on it," Ducaire told him. "Show us whose side you're on." In prison, that kind of moment isn't just a test of nerve. It's a declaration that echoes through every tier, every cell block, every yard. Everyone watching knows exactly what it means. Gagné refused. Ducaire beat him badly, left him barely standing. But Gagné didn't stay down. Once he'd recovered enough to move, he tracked Ducaire down with a metal bar and nearly put him unconscious. That act of controlled, deliberate violence sent a signal to everyone in that prison. To rock machine members, to Hells Angels associates, to anyone paying attention. Gagné was aligned, and Gagné didn't bend. Word reached Boucher across the Quebec prison system. He was so impressed that he ordered his son Francis to deliver cash payments to Gagné's wife every week while he finished his sentence. That's not just respect in that world. That's a message to everyone watching that this man is protected. In early 1995, Gagné was transferred to a facility in Sorel, where Boucher was serving 6 months on a weapons charge. The two men spent hours together in the yard, walking circuits, talking, building something. Boucher was studying him, seeing what was underneath. What he found was exactly what he needed: loyalty, brutality, and a complete willingness to go all the way. Inside that same prison, Gagné became known for something guards quietly called the pain miroir, a ritual of deliberate degradation where he fermented urine and feces inside sealed bottles, then hurled them at correctional officers. It wasn't just rebellion. In the hierarchy of prison politics, it was a statement. You don't control me, you don't intimidate me, and I will make your life as uncomfortable as you make mine. In April 1996, Gagné was released. On his first day of freedom, he called Francis Boucher. On his second day, he sat down to lunch with Maurice himself. Boucher looked at him across the table and said, "I've got important work for you. I want you to stick around." Within days, Gagné was embedded in the Hells Angels machine. Boucher had a plan to bomb a rock machine clubhouse with hundreds of pounds of dynamite, then send gunmen inside to finish anyone who crawled out of the rubble. Gagné was in the middle of it, stealing vehicles, packing explosives, scouting locations, waiting for the order. But the bombs never went off. Every single time they positioned for an attack, something went wrong. A police cruiser would appear near the target, an officer walking the block, a patrol that shouldn't have been there. Again and again, the operations collapsed at the last second. What Gagné didn't know, what none of them knew, was that there was already a rat inside the organization. His name was Danny Kane, a fellow rocker, a man who sat in the same rooms, attended the same meetings, earned the same trust. He was also RCMP informant number 3683, being paid by the Royal Canadian Mounted Police to feed intelligence on Hells Angels operations in real time. Kane was the reason Gagné's bombs never killed anyone. He was the silent hand keeping the body count from rising. Gagné had no idea, neither did Boucher. The man they trusted most was the one quietly dismantling everything they were building. On August 23, 1996, police seized one of the vans Gagné had packed with explosives. 200 pounds of dynamite parked outside a rock machine clubhouse, primed and ready. Despite the failures, Boucher kept Gagné close. In late 1996, he brought him into the Rockers, the feeder club for the Hells Angels, the place where men auditioned for full membership. The Rockers operated in two teams. The baseball team handled enforcement, beatings, intimidation, collections, the muscle work that kept the operation running. The football team was different in kind. Testifying later in court, Gagné described it simply, "The football team is a team of killers." That's where Gagné was assigned. Security inside the Rockers was so tight that members communicated through sign language and erasable magnetic boards. No phone calls about business, no written orders. The fear of wiretaps was constant, and the paranoia was justified. To earn a full patch in the Hells Angels, you don't just pay dues and show up to rides. You prove you're capable of the worst. And in 1997, Gagné was about to prove it twice. In March 1997, Gagné received his first murder contract. A rival dealer named Christian Bellemare had been cutting into Hells Angels territory. The organization wanted him gone. Gagné and fellow rocker Steve Boys kidnapped Bellemare and drove him deep into the Laurentian Mountains north of Montreal to a chalet in the woods, the kind of place where no one hears anything and nothing comes back. Bellemare begged for his life. Gagné pulled his gun. It jammed. Boys fired first. Between them, they put 3 bullets into Bellemare and left him there in the snow. They drove away certain the job was done. Hours later, Bellemare dug himself out of the snow, still alive. The botched murder forced Gagné into hiding for a month, certain that Boucher would have him killed for the failure. In the Hells Angels, failure on a contract isn't just embarrassing, it's potentially fatal. But in May 1997, instead of a bullet, Gagné received a promotion. He became a hang-around member of the Rockers, one step closer to full membership. Boucher wasn't done testing him. By 1997, Boucher had become convinced that someone inside the organization was feeding information to police. Too many operations had collapsed at exactly the wrong moment. The pattern wasn't coincidence, it was betrayal. His response was as calculated as it was monstrous. He would order his men to kill people connected to the justice system, prison guards, court officials, anyone in a government uniform. His logic was deliberately terrifying. If members of his organization killed people like that, anyone who even considered cooperating with police would understand the consequences, not just for themselves, for anyone connected to the system. Bauchy called it destabilizing the system. What he was really doing was constructing a wall of fear, a wall built from bodies. In the summer of 1997, 2 senior Hells Angels members approached Gagné with the assignment. They needed him to help kill a prison guard, not a specific guard, any guard. Someone picked at random from the Bordeaux lot after their shift. The target didn't matter, the statement did. On June 26, 1997, Gagné and André Toots Toussaint stole 2 Suzuki Katana motorcycles. The original plan had Toussaint as the shooter, riding behind Gagné. At the last minute, they switched. Gagné became the trigger man. Just before 10 that night, they positioned outside Bordeaux prison and waited for guards to finish their shifts. Diane Levine walked out of the building, got in her minivan, and pulled onto the Laurentian Highway, heading north toward home. She was 49 years old. She'd worked inside that prison for over a decade. She had 2 daughters waiting for her. The motorcycles pulled alongside her van as she left the island of Montreal. Gagné opened fire. 1 bullet tore through her arm. Another hit her lung. The van drifted to a slow stop on the shoulder of the highway. Diane Levine died on the road. A broken Smith & Wesson revolver was left at the scene. Gagné and Toussaint burned their clothes in the woods and vanished into the night. The next day, Gagné walked down St. Catherine Street in downtown Montreal, alongside Maurice Boucher. A casual afternoon stroll. When Boucher looked at him, he said, "That's great, my godass. It's not serious that she had tits." That was the entire eulogy that Diane Levine got from the man who ordered her death. That night, Gagné went home. His wife, Marie-Claude, was watching the evening news. Diane Levine's murder was the top story. Marie-Claude looked at the screen and said, "Whoever did this must be a sick person." Gagné quietly left the room. Days later, a Rock Machine member deliberately ran Gagné over with a car in retaliation. He spent a month in the hospital recovering. Boucher visited him and promoted him anyway. Gagné became a prospect with the Rockers. On August 21, 1997, he officially received his half-patch Rocker colors. He was close. One more act of loyalty. One more demonstration that he was willing to go all the way. 2 weeks after Diane Levine's murder, another Hells Angels associate turned himself into police. Boucher was accelerating. More pressure, more bodies. He needed Paul Fontaine to prove his loyalty the same way Gagné had. On September 8, 1997, just after 6 a.m., Fontaine and Gagné were waiting in a stolen van near Rivière-des-Prairies prison. Their target was a prison transport bus collecting inmates for courthouse appearances. The bus arrived on schedule. Pierre Rondeau was driving. His partner, Robert Corriveau, rode beside him in the front. The bus was otherwise empty. Fontaine and Gagné moved in. The ambush happened at a railway crossing in Pointe-aux-Trembles. Fontaine climbed onto the hood of the moving bus and fired his revolver point-blank through the windshield. 3 bullets went through Pierre Rondeau's chest. Gagné fired from the side and wounded Corriveau. Pierre Rondeau was dead before the bus stopped moving. Fontaine and Gagné fled in the stolen van. Gagné tried to set it on fire to eliminate the evidence. He closed the doors too quickly and cut off the oxygen. The fire died. The murder weapons were left inside the van, intact. A woman at a nearby bus stop, Nancy Dubé, got a clear look at Gagné's face as he fled the scene. Within hours, police had a composite sketch. It looked exactly like Stéphane Gagné. Boucher didn't seem concerned. He paid for Gagné and his family to vacation in the Dominican Republic. Let the heat die down. While Gagné was sitting on a Caribbean beach, detectives in Montreal were quietly assembling a case that would eventually bring the entire Quebec Hells Angels machine to its knees. They just needed someone to break. In December 1997, the net started closing. On December 4th, police raided a Hells Angels-connected strip club and seized millions in drugs and dozens of weapons. Among those arrested was Steve Boys, the same man who had been with Gagné when they tried and failed to kill Christian Bellemare. Boys was facing life in prison, possibly deportation back to Peru. He made a decision. Just after 11 the following night, police intercepted Gagné as he tried to disappear into a motel in Saint-Ignace. They arrested his wife at the same time, charging her as an accessory to murder. They told her directly, if she didn't cooperate, their son could end up in foster care. Gagné was brought to an interrogation room at the police station. He had no idea that boys had already given him up. At 2:40 in the morning, the door opened. Sergeant Detective Robert Pigeon walked in. Pigeon wasn't physically imposing. Medium height, round face, brown eyes, quiet, steady voice. Nothing about him looked dangerous, but that was exactly the point. In an interrogation room, the men who look dangerous are the ones you can prepare for. Pigeon was the kind of man you didn't see coming, and once he started talking, you couldn't stop listening. He had arrested Gagné before, back in 1994. He understood him completely. He knew what Gagné was. A grade 7 dropout whose entire sense of worth was built on the acceptance of an organization that used men like him and discarded them without blinking. Pigeon was about to dismantle that. For hours, he alternated between empathy and devastation. One moment, he was almost kind. He talked about Gagné's family, his son, his life. He reminded Gagné he wasn't a monster. He was a father and a husband and someone who loved people. Then he'd switch, cold, precise, merciless. You murdered an unarmed woman in cold blood. You think that makes you a man? Gagné said nothing. Then Pigeon made it formal. I arrest you for the murder of Diane Levine. We know everything. He told Gagné he knew about the burn attempt on the van. He knew about the Dominican Republic trip. Much of it was calculated bluffing, but Gagné couldn't tell the difference. Pigeon started mocking him, not angrily, methodically. He imitated Gagné's voice, his swagger, the fantasy of what Gagné thought he'd become. Yahoo! I killed the prison guard. Yahoo! Me, Stéphane Gagné. I wanted a Hell's Angels patch. Gagné finally snapped. I have nothing to say. Put me in my cell. Pigeon didn't stop. You're a grade 7 dropout who can't even speak proper French. The Hell's Angels abandoned you. Where are your lawyers? Nobody's coming for you. And the devastating part, it was all true. The lawyers who normally represented Hell's Angels members weren't returning Gagné's calls. Boucher hadn't sent anyone. The organization that Gagné had killed for, bled for, nearly died for, had cut him loose the moment he became a liability. At 6:30 in the morning, Gagné finally broke. If I talk, how many years could I expect to get? At 7:30, Marie-Claude arrived at the station. She looked at her husband and told him she wasn't going to prison for crimes she didn't commit. She wasn't losing their son. Pigeon played the first 5 minutes of Boy's confession video. That was all it took. At 8:10 in the morning, Stéphane Gagné began his full confession. 2 weeks later, Gagné sat across from Crown attorney André Vincent to negotiate terms. He wanted full immunity. He wanted $1 million. He wanted to walk away from everything completely clean. Vincent refused every word of it. The Quebec people, he said, would not pay a murderer to profit from his crimes. In exchange for testifying against Maurice Boucher, Gagné pled guilty to the murder of Diane Levine. He would receive 25 years. The only financial arrangement, $400 a week to help support his son. The Hells Angels made one final move. They offered Gagné a $1 million bribe to stay silent and refuse the stand. When he turned it down, they burned his parents' house to the ground. The message didn't need explanation. Next time, they'll be inside. But it was too late. Gagné had already decided. Maurice Boucher was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder on December 18, 1997. The man he had chosen, mentored, promoted, and trusted to kill for the organization was now the Crown's most important witness. In November 1998, the trial began. Defense lawyer Jacques Larochelle went after Gagné relentlessly. Every lie he'd ever told, every crime he'd ever committed, every manipulation, every contradiction, every moment where his story had bent to fit his purposes. And then Larochelle pulled out the kill shot. Under oath, Gagné admitted, I have no respect for the truth. The judge, Jean-Guy Boillarge, repeatedly sided with the defense. He excluded evidence supporting Gagné's testimony. He gave jury instructions that tilted so heavily toward Boucher that the tilt became its own story. On November 27, 1998, Boucher was acquitted. Outside the courthouse, his supporters erupted. Inside Quebec, public outrage came down like a hammer. The headlines wrote themselves, "A confessed killer received 25 years. The man who ordered the killings walked free." Gagné said later, "Justice had not been served. I was disappointed because I owed at least that to the families." For nearly 2 years, Boucher lived as a free man. Then prosecutors appealed. On October 10th, 2000, the Quebec Court of Appeal overturned the acquittal. The judges ruled that Boilard's conduct had been so egregiously biased that a new trial was not just warranted, it was required. Boucher was arrested again. The second trial began on March 26, 2002. This time, the Crown backed Gagné's testimony with phone records, surveillance footage, and documentary evidence that didn't depend on the word of one man. And Gagné himself was different on the stand, composed, precise, immovable. After 11 days of deliberation, the jury came back. On May 5, 2002, Maurice Boucher was convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of attempted murder. He would spend the rest of his life in a cage. He died in prison on April 20th, 2022. He was 69 years old. He never showed remorse. Gagné spent years in isolation, separated from the general prison population for his own protection. The Hells Angels had a standing contract on his life, and prison authorities weren't taking chances. In 2006, he was diagnosed with cancer. He went through chemotherapy alone in his cell. Somewhere in those years, something in him changed. He began studying meditation under a Buddhist monk who regularly visited the prison. He claimed he experienced a genuine spiritual awakening. Whether that's true, whether a man who executed a random widow on a highway for a patch he never earned can actually be reborn, only Gagné knows. He wrote letters to Diane Levine's daughters. He apologized. They never responded. One day his son came to visit. The boy he had named Harley David, now a grown man. They sat across from each other in the prison visiting room, and his son said, "Dad, I'm ashamed of you, but I love you the same." On October 18th, 2018, after 21 years behind bars, Gagné was granted day parole. In February 2023, he was approved to live in a halfway house. The parole board wrote in their decision, "You say you have a thought for the victims every morning, you will never forgive yourself." During a 2016 parole hearing, Gagné told the board a joke. 2 Hells Angels walk into the woods. One says, "It's dark and I'm scared." The other responds, "I'm going to be even more afraid when I go back alone." By then, Gagné understood the fundamental truth about the brotherhood he had killed for. Loyalty in that world doesn't mean what it sounds like. It isn't something you earn and keep. It lasts exactly as long as you're useful, and ends the moment you become a problem. There is no code that protects you when the organization decides you're finished. There is no patch that covers you when the lawyers stop returning calls. Diane Levine was 49 years old when she died on that highway. She left behind 2 daughters. Pierre Rondeau was 48 years old. His family never got the chance to say goodbye. Maurice Boucher died in prison, unrepentant. And Stéphane Gagné lives today under a new name, somewhere in Canada, looking over his shoulder at every face that might remember his. He wanted power. He killed for a patch. And in the end, all he has left is the weight of what it cost.